guest today is KBC's very own Don Spencer, and our topic is how to give your pastor a raise. Don, thank you for taking the time to let me interview you on Leadership Lessons.
My pleasure.
Let me tell you a little bit about Don. Don's been serving at the KBC since he was a child, 1977. Not really a child, but he has just celebrated 46 years of continued service with the convention, which is a record. And Don has driven all over the state. He served churches of every size throughout that time. He now serves as the church financial benefits consultant. He is a certified financial planner and author. He attends Highland Park First Baptist Church, where he serves as organist. Don's married to Barbara. They've been married for 55 years. They have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. So, Don, let's jump right into these questions. You didn't enter ministry to end up in the position that you're in now. So tell us a little bit more about your early sense of calling and what you did initially in Christian ministry leadership.
My initial calling, I can't pinpoint a time where it was just right there at that given time. It evolved. I think as I look back, that was working in my life even as a youth. I grew up in a church that was very strong in what today we would call calling out the call.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it at the time, but we had a number of people that I grew up with that went into ministry. And I'm very indebted to my pastor, and especially to the ministry of music at church I grew up in. I spent a lot of time with him. I was also heavily involved in music in school, and both the band director and choir director were church folks, and so had that influence. Worked with our minister of music, and even in high school, I started working with him, spent a lot of time with him, and he actually, in my junior year of high school, turned over the children's choir to me. And my junior and senior year, I was the children's choir director. And all of that kept evolving. Ended up going to Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia, for a church music degree. And then from there, in Southern Seminary. During some of that time, it started evolving, that sense of what I would see now as a calling. And I still remember talking to my home pastor about that issue. And to this day, I remember him telling me, if you can do anything else and be happy, then do it. Don't go into the ministry. His emphasis was that if God's calling you, you won't be able to be happy doing anything else.
I still believe that, don't you, Don? That if God's calling you, then man, that's everything else is just not going to satisfy or be as fulfilling.
Yeah, I believe it. I think he was very accurate on that. Came on Southern Seminary. Started serving a month after I got here at Eastern Parkway Baptist Church. Was on staff there for 5 years. That's where I met Barbara. And then I spent 5 years on staff at Priscilla Baptist Church.
Okay.
And then after that, it was at KBC. And I still remember, and this kind of relates to that sense of calling, the team leader at that time when I was interviewed at KBC was James Slater. And I remember him making a statement talking about the amount of travel, the impact that would have on family and so forth. He told me, he said, if God is leading you to do this, then also call your wife. And that stuck in my mind, and I did not tell Barbara about that. And it was probably a couple of weeks later, we were coming back from Lexington, those times where you're just riding along, not saying anything. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she just said, the Lord's leading with me. That was all I needed right there.
Wow.
That solidified it.
Yeah. Well, so you've been with the convention on mission board staff for 46 years, but you didn't start out in finances. You started out with music. How did you become interested in finances and end up in the position that you're in now?
I've always had an interest in that. I guess perhaps somebody goes back to my dad was an accountant. I don't know if that fitted into it or not, but and even in working with the music area, I did some things related to the financial stuff with them. Some compensation studies, helping minister the music, do some of the same stuff I do now with a broader group of people that I had that interest. And I think that led to the invitation for me to take this position when my predecessor retired. And had some struggles in that. Bill Rogers was the team leader at the time and asked me to consider taking it. I turned him down. A couple of weeks later, he sent me a memo and put it in writing asking me to. And I wrote him a long memo back, appreciation, but still no. Yeah. And a few days later, he called me and asked me, "Well, come down to his office for just a few minutes. You want to talk?" I went down there. He had the rest of the staff in there in his office with him. And told me, he said, "We've all read your memo. And we hear you saying no. But in between the lines, we're reading maybe."
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah. So we struggled with it, talked some more, prayed about it, considered it more, and finally decided maybe the Lord's leadership will ever in ministry.
Wow. How about that? So, Don, let's talk about then church finances. Why should church leaders, pastors care about preaching? They want to shepherd the flock. They want to care for people. Why should pastors think about and be concerned with church finances?
Well, the simple answer is everything we're going to do in ministry has some cost to it.
Yeah.
That's an oversimplification, but it's a reality. And so we have a responsibility to make sure the funds that are available are used wisely in the best way. And also related to that is the fact that we are commanded by Scripture to be good stewards. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to be good stewards, we've got to deal with finances. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much emphasis there is in the Scripture on stewardship. 2/3 of Jesus' parables deal either directly or indirectly with stewardship kind of issues. So if it's that important to Jesus, it must be important for us. Yeah. And I've often told people when you talk about financial planning, you show me how somebody handles their money, and it tells me volumes about their relationship with the Lord. Show me how a couple handles their money, it tells me volumes. Show me how a church handles the financial resources. It tells me volumes about that church's healthy relationship with the Lord. So it's a strong outward indicator. If they're going to be good stewards, we've got to be concerned about the finances.
Well, Don, one of the challenges for pastors and church leaders is when they think about, handling the money and giving to missions and giving to outreach in the church and funding the various programs. That's all important, but it also deals with their own pay. So when a pastor, our topic today is how to talk about a pay raise for your pastor, and then what can a pastor even do if he has to initiate that conversation. What are some of the challenges that go along with that conversation of talking about a pay raise for pastor? And we could say staff as well, but let's just stick with pastor here initially. Go ahead.
Well, I think we would all accept the fact that there are extremely few, if any, pastors that go into the ministry from the end.
Yeah.
They just don't do it. Yep. But pastors, just like everyone else, are commanded in the Scripture to take care of the needs of their family. Mm-hmm. And I still remember some years ago, a former professor at Southern Seminary told me in a meeting we were having, and I mentioned that verse of Scripture, and he pointed out that in the original language, that when it says take care of the needs of, it implies an added meaning we don't get in any of his translations. He said it implies your forethought towards the future, which I thought was quite powerful. And so we have that responsibility, every pastor does. And the pastor's going to be concerned about taking care of his family. If the church is not providing adequate compensation, then part of his energy and his attention and his concern is going to be diverted to those issues of taking care of his family. That's why I've maintained often that the church owes it to themselves to make sure their pastor's pay is adequate. If they want to have the best pastor they can have, who is not devoted in his attention to those family issues excessively, then they need to make sure the pay is adequate. Otherwise, he's going to be devoted away from being the best pastor he can be.
And Don, if I could interrupt you for a second, I think I saw a Lifeway study, and it cited in a book, I think it's from 2015 or maybe a little bit later, that 48% of pastors were concerned with their own financial well-being. And just to your point, if you're thinking day by day of how am I going to take care of my family, it's hard to focus on sermon preparation, the needs of the congregation, and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they start thinking about their family and the things they can't do because they don't have the resources. It tears their heart out.
Yep. So Don, what are some challenges when that conversation starts? When a pastor he thinks, man, the church is doing pretty well here. I'm watching the giving grow, the budget grow, but my own pay is not necessarily growing. As a pastor of this church, how can he start that conversation? Is it best if somebody else initiates it? Who else can initiate it? Help us think through getting the conversation going.
That's different, and it's going to be so different in every situation. It's going to depend on the church. It's going to depend on that pastor, his personality. I like to emphasize the need for a frame of reference that says, my responsibility is to take care of the needs of my family.
Yeah.
And we're not in it for the money, but we need to have adequate pay. And if that's not existent, then let's talk about the need. It's not that we're in it for more money, but I just have some basic needs here. And how are we going to meet those needs? Some dialogue there. I think a lot of the times in many churches, there's going to be like one or two key people that the pastor can talk to with some degree of confidence, and they can be the advocate. I think having that advocate within the church is a strong thing.
Don, is there any frame of reference that you could kind of compare maybe where a pastor's pay ought to be in a congregation? So you think about all the other vocations that could exist in a church. There's self-employed people who may not make a lot. They may make a great deal of money. There are school teachers possibly in a church. There may be business professionals, factory workers, maybe supervisors. How can a church begin to think about where their pastors pay, if they're able to pay for fully meet his needs for a full-time pastor? Where should his pay fit within the cost of living or the scale of living of the rest of the congregation?
Now, given the training that's required, the experience most churches expect, and the multiple kinds of responsibilities that the pastor has, a lot of people have suggested something as a measuring stick. Let's look at somebody like maybe the principal or the assistant principal in the school system.
Yep.
That's at least something to start with and look at.
So it seems fair for a lot of reasons that to think it's a supervised position, it's a position of responsibility, it's an oversight position, it's a stewardship of a facility. He has to have a large skill set to be able to help a church move forward. So it seems like a fair comparison to a principal or an assistant principal.
Right. I think it works pretty well in most communities. But one of the problems we have is that so many churches use what we call a lump sum pay package.
Right.
And that creates a nightmare a lot of the times. No other employer anywhere else will do that. Only in the church, because we've got room for that kind of a rep. And it distorts what they're really paying is. The church is looking at the total cost, they're equating that with what they pay. If you ask that school principal or you ask the teachers if they get paid, and if they tell you 99 times out of 100, I will guess, they're not going to tell you about their insurance and their retirement.
Right.
And anything else. Here's what my salary is.
Those are their benefits.
Right.
But you're saying a church
but
may
in
often...
the church, they lump it all together.
Yeah.
And it distorts what the real pay really is.
So Don, if a pastor himself is the one that has to start that conversation, if he's the one, he sees it. Give me a step one, step two. What would you recommend if a pastor calls you and says, Don, our church is doing well, we're growing, people are giving, but my family's struggling. I just need some advice. What should I do? How would you help him?
Well, I think I would go back to the thing of, talking to the appropriate person about the need,
Yeah.
why the need is there, and how are we going to address it. In one church, it may be a case that they don't have the resources to do it, but let's talk about how I can take care of my family. It may mean I need another job along with it. And let's just have some dialogue. It's going to vary from every church.
If a church leader calls you and they say, Don, I'm chair of deacons, or I'm chair of personnel committee, or chair of finance committee at so-and-so Baptist church, and we're thinking that we need to give our pastor a pay raise, or our pastor and staff, but we really don't know how to start. Would you come meet with us? We know you're going to say yes. Cooperative program gives you a car to drive, and you're going to show up at their meeting. And how are you going to help them kind of think through what they can do, what they should do? What are some things you're going to ask them to think about?
Well, I'm going to walk through a 4-step process of how they should put together the compensation and the whole financial support package. And we'll talk about covering the expenses with the job done, separate from the pay. Too many churches lump that in with the pay. We'll talk about the basic compensation. We'll talk about the benefits that they need to have. And we'll also talk about some of the problems that exist if they revert to the lump sum pay package. It just creates so many issues. But a lot of the times when I'm working with the church, their main concern is the total cost. So I have done so many churches where I'll take that total cost and I'll work out a pay package for them to take back to them. So it looks like it was done the right way from the bottom up to begin with, but it does equal their total cost. So the thing I like to always point out to them when we do all of that, now here's the real pay. Is that adequate or not? And I've had some cases, I think of one not too long ago, a seminary student that was going to a church, and we did exactly that. A lump sum was a given. So we put together the package and made it look like it had been done the right way, and he took it back and said, is this what you intended? Here's the real pay. And they looked at it, and after a bit, then I spoke up and said, no, we had no idea.
Yeah.
And they increased it. Now, sometimes to do that, maybe it's not adequate, but it's all we can afford to do.
Sure, absolutely, and that's a totally different story. When a church is doing its very best that it can. So when you're thinking about principles, Don, about what a church should think about in paying their pastor, I think you just touched on one, that we are limited in what we can do. Maybe that's a scenario, but think about one where a church has plenty of resources, and they just haven't kind of kept up with the times on what it costs to live. They're looking at that big picture number and not taking into consideration that 40% of this is never showing up in his bank account, buying beans and potatoes and shoes for his children. It's going to insurance and retirement and everything else. What are 2 or 3 principles that you'd have them think about as a church?
Well, one would be, let's look at what other churches comparable to your church are doing. We have our SBC compensation studies that is very valuable to help them do that. Another part of it is back to the needs space. What does it take for the families? What is the people in your church make?
And so this pastor is coming to devote his life to this church. We want to devote our resources to taking care of him and his family. We don't want our pastor to be in need if our church has the means to take care of him. Yeah. Well,
and we get back to the whole thing of, do you want your pastor to be the best pastor he can be?
Yeah.
Well, give him the freedom from those unnecessary financial concerns, so he can devote his energy to be the best pastor.
Don, that's very helpful. And I know you've helped so many so many churches. When you're having those conversations yourself, what's the greatest? I mean, you're a mission board staff member. You love Kentucky Baptist. You love the churches you're serving. You want to see pastors well cared for. What's the biggest challenge for you personally when you're having those conversations with church leaders?
Probably the biggest challenge, well, we've already mentioned the lump sum pay package. That is always a huge challenge.
Yep.
Um, Another major challenge is the unique tax laws that apply to ministers.
Explain that.
Well, we probably need a good 2 hours to
Yeah.
get about that, but related to the minister's housing allowance, related to Social Security, and the two biggies. And there's so many misunderstandings. And I spent a lot of my time answering emails and phone calls, clarifying a lot of these tax issues for ministers, because there are so many misconceptions about them.
So Don, let's talk about a couple of those. So you mentioned housing allowance and you mentioned Social Security. How is Social Security different for a pastor than it is for the school teacher or the person that works at the factory?
Yeah, the school teacher probably is this. So they're used the factory worker. They're on regular, what they call FICA Social Security. The employer withholds half of the Social Security from their pay, and then they match it with the other half.
Mm-hmm.
The minister is always self-employed for Social Security, always.
Yep.
And pays the entire 15.3%. So many times the church does not allow for that at all. Not realizing that that's a huge chunk of the taxes. In fact, most pastors, the income tax side of it is not a major issue for them. It's the self-employment Social Security. It's the other for them.
Yeah. So if that church is that pastor's being paid, just say $50,000, 15% of that goes off the top to Social Security.
Exactly.
Yeah. And most folks don't understand that. That's not what's happening on their paycheck. They assume their pastor's paycheck is just like theirs, but it's not. But he has this housing allowance benefit. So explain how the housing allowance is a benefit for a pastor.
The housing, to the degree they use it for housing, and it meets the IRS limit, they can designate, have the church designate that much of their pay as housing allowance. And that frees them from having to pay the state and federal income tax on it, but it doesn't change the Social Security. They still pay the self-employment Social Security on that. And that's often an area of misperception as well. For most younger pastors, particularly if they have children, the income taxes are not going to be the major factor anyway. It still saves in taxes, but it doesn't help them on Social Security.
But on that $50,000, say if 25,000 of it is set aside for his housing allowance, then he only has to pay Social Security on that other 25,000. Is that?
I pay Social Security on the entire 50.
Okay.
Pays income tax on the
25.
The remaining 25.
Right. Okay. So bivocational pastors is an entirely different story. What special challenges do bivocational pastors face when it comes to advocating for their compensation?
Well, that's a whole different ballgame, and there are so many variables here. A lot of the bivocational pastors, they will have adequate income from their secular employment. Sometimes it's dealing with avoiding taxes as much as anything on the church income. I find most of the time in the bivocational situation, it's more just looking at, okay, what responsibilities, how much time are they going to be spending in responsibilities they have, and it's paying them more based on that than it is trying to provide a total living wage.
Mm-hmm. Don, one of the things you do is help pastors think about their retirement, and you've been doing that for a long time. We advocate for Godstone, and a lot of our pastors in Kentucky use Godstone for retirement. Godstone has something for to help widows in some cases. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe families who've invested their life in ministry, but at the end of their ministry, they need some additional help. What does Guidestone do to help with that?
Yeah, it's a program called Mission Dignity, and it's an endowment that they have that they're constantly raising money for to provide that additional income, whether they're particularly a widow or even a retired pastor sometimes. So they served a lot of churches through the years, so their pay was very low. They weren't able to save in retirement adequately. And their income and their assets all below certain levels. And that's going to help those funds to provide some additional pay. They're not talking big dollars, but for the income levels they're living on, those dollars that are given are huge for them.
And Don, I was at a church just the other day preaching, and a lady came up to me and shared with me that she was a recipient of Mission Dignity, and folks have because of the kindness of others, other Southern Baptist people just ministering and giving and providing, then she was able to benefit. And this is a couple they served their entire life in Christian ministry. What are some of those common mistakes that pastors and churches make regarding finances?
I'd say the first one again, I keep going back to it, but that lump sum is where the business goes.
So any church that's just doing a lump sum pay package that says we just pay our pastor $50,000, he can do whatever he wants to with it, they're hindering their pastor, and they need to think through that. They should call you and let you help them better understand how to better serve their pastor.
By all means, I would love to be able to help them doing that. The other mistakes I run into frequently that create problems is one where they file the taxes for the minister as self-employed, as an employee for income tax. And then conversely, they'll do the exact opposite on Social Security once in a while, and they'll pay regular tax-free Social Security. And that creates problems. We have one pastor down in the western part of the state, on the Hopkinsville side, where the church has paid regular FIC and Social Security on in 14 years. He will retire, and Social Security looked at his records and said, your Social Security benefit is based on self-employment Social Security. You got 0 credits for 14 years.
Oh my goodness.
That creates a problem.
Boy, that's a serious problem. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Another problem is not using accountable reimbursement for expenses. That creates problems tax-wise and understanding that he used expenses not probably paid. Failing to maximize the use of the housing allowance. Take full advantage of that as a problem. Along with that is the failure to deal correctly with the limits on the housing allowance and apply that. Another mistake that I see churches doing, sometimes they will give gifts to the pastor or maybe a Social Security equivalent, and they don't treat that as taxable income. That's additional taxable income. Another problem in the churches, this doesn't relate as much to the pastor, but it goes to the churches where they have what are called contract workers. And they don't report that to the IRS, which they should be reporting. Or sometimes they will use the 1099 form for the pastor, and they shouldn't be using this. Another problem is the incorrect reporting of charitable contributions. I probably get more emails with questions about charitable giving and how it applies to being tax deductible and anything else.
My goodness. So Don, let's take our last couple of minutes here. If a church would like to have some help in any of these areas, they can reach you, don.spencer, SPENCER, at kybaptist.org. Your work is funded by the cooperative program. You're available to any Kentucky Baptist church, whether they're a CP giving church or not. You're going to help them and minister to them. So you're doing Equip events right now. The last one is coming up tomorrow. You did training there on church finances. You often go into associations and just set up a day to meet with pastors and church leaders. You do other types of stewardship training throughout the year. And you meet with finance committees. If a church calls you and invites you in, you'll come meet with their personnel, their staff, if it's a single staff, their finance committee, their deacons, anyone they need you to meet with, because you want to help churches get this right, make the best use of the dollars they have to work with, and take care of their pastor and staff. Anything else that I failed to mention that you do that's an important part of your work?
Those are the main things. And then the follow-up to all of that is a lot of emails and phone calls.
Well, Don, in your 46 years with KBC, I've only been able to watch 11 of those years, and you put as many miles on your car as anybody and work as many hours as anybody in the work that we do, because I know you love churches, you love leaders, and you want to help them. You have a great name in Kentucky. Don, let me ask you this question. You have one of the things I know that you do is that folks have no idea what a family man that you are. You collect photos throughout the year of your family and produce a video that you all watch every year at Christmas time. Someday, far down the road, when you're gone on to be with the Lord, and somebody comes across, one of your grandchildren comes across an archive of this conversation or one of those videos, what do you want your family to remember most about you?
Oh, no. I guess just that I was faithful to them, that I loved them.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt they're going to remember those two things, that you've been faithful to them and you've been faithful to the Lord serving Kentucky Baptist. Don, I'm grateful to get to work with you, to see your work ethic, to see your integrity. You're loved throughout the state. Whenever you show up, folks want to come talk to you about Guidestone and how the market's doing on their retirement and are they doing the right thing. When folks get ready to retire, you're one person that any Kentucky Baptist leader needs to be talking to.
Glad to do it.
Well, Don, thank you for your ministry, and thank you for serving pastors and churches, and thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
My pleasure.